I only intended to hand him a hot coffee for the blizzard, but he insisted I take his leather gloves. They looked like they did not belong on the sidewalk. I assumed it was a gift until I saw a stitched symbol inside the wrist, one from family files my mother forbade me from mentioning. Then a legal letter arrived the day I had lost all hope, stating they were searching for the person who received those specific gloves. My name is Addison Gray. I am 29 years old, and if you had asked me at 4 o'clock on that Tuesday afternoon to describe my life in one word, I would have said frozen. Pittsburgh in February is not for the faint of heart. It is a city of steel and bridges, but in the dead of winter, it becomes a grayscale landscape of slush and biting wind that finds the gaps in your coat, no matter how tightly you button it. I was working for Graybridge Reilly and Company, a firm that sounded prestigious on paper, but in reality meant I was running errands for senior agents and taking the listings nobody else wanted. That day was the heaviest snowfall of the season. The sky was a flat, bruised purple, dumping inches of heavy, wet snow onto the streets faster than the plows could clear it. I was vibrating with anxiety and caffeine, rushing between two showings that were doomed to fail. The first was a drafty Victorian in the slopes that smelled like wet dog. The second was a cramped condo downtown with no parking. My car, a 10-year-old sedan that shuddered when it idled, was currently fighting a losing battle against the icy incline of Liberty Avenue. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My gloves were the problem. They were cheap acrylic things I had bought from a clearance bin 3 years ago. The yarn at the fingertips had unraveled, leaving my skin exposed to the frigid air blasting from the car's broken heater vents. I could not feel my thumbs. My phone, mounted on the dashboard, flashed a warning 10% battery remaining. I cursed under my breath. My charger cable had frayed and died 2 days ago, and I had not had the spare $20 to replace it yet. If the phone died, I lost the GPS. If I lost the GPS, I would be late. If I was late, the client would walk. I felt the tires spin uselessly on a patch of black ice. The car fishtailed, drifting sickeningly toward the curb before the treads finally caught the pavement. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. "Just get through today, Addison," I whispered to the empty car. "Just get through today." I decided to park early. The condo showing was not for another 45 minutes, but the roads were becoming impassable. I wedged my car into a spot near a bakery that was already flipping its sign to closed. The wind outside was ferocious. It whipped my hair across my face the moment I stepped onto the sidewalk, stinging my cheeks like tiny needles. I needed heat. I needed a moment where the world wasn't demanding something from me. I ducked into the alcove of the bakery, just out of the wind's direct path, fumbling with my scarf. That was when I saw him. He was sitting on a plastic crate tucked against the brick wall, sheltered by the bakery's awning. He was an older man, perhaps in his 70s, with a thick beard the color of oxidized silver. He wore a thin navy blue windbreaker that looked terrifyingly inadequate for the temperature. He should have been shivering. He should have been huddled in a ball, but he wasn't. He was sitting with a strange upright posture, his hands folded calmly in his lap. When I looked at him, he didn't look away or hold out a cup for change. He met my gaze. His eyes were a startling clear gray, sharp, and entirely lucid. He looked like he was reading a book. Only the book was me. I felt a pang of guilt that hit me harder than the cold. Here I was feeling sorry for myself because my heater was broken and my commission check was late. While this man was sitting in a blizzard with nothing, I checked my wallet. I had a $5 bill and someone's. I went inside the bakery just as the girl behind the counter was locking the register. "One large black coffee," I said, my teeth chattering. "And whatever bagel is left." I was about to toss the sesame ones, she said, looking bored. She handed me a paper bag and the steaming cup. "Take it." I walked back out into the cold. The man was still there. He watched me approach, his expression unreadable. "It's awful out here," I said, my voice snatching away in the wind. I extended the cup in the bag. "It's hot. Please take it." He looked at the coffee, then up at my face. He didn't grab it greedily. He took it with a slow, deliberate movement, his fingers brushing against my frozen ones. His hands were weathered, the skin like parchment, but they were steady. "Thank you," he said. His voice was deep, growly, but lacked the slur of intoxication or the tremble of the freezing. It sounded educated. He broke the bagel in half. He didn't eat it immediately. Instead, he looked at me with an intensity that made me want to check if my makeup was smeared. "You look like you are running a race nobody else is watching," he said. I blinked, taken aback. "I have a showing work." He took a sip of the coffee, closing his eyes for a second as the steam rose around his face. "You have weary eyes for someone so young. Why did you stop? Most people speed up when they see me." "You looked cold," I said honestly. He smiled then, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was a knowing one. "And you aren't. Look at your hands, miss." I looked down. My hands were red and raw where the cheap gloves had failed. I was shaking not just from the temperature, but from the drop in adrenaline. "You gave me the coffee," he observed quietly. "You share even when you are lacking yourself." The sentence struck me like a physical blow. It was too accurate. I was overdrawn at the bank. I was emotionally overdrawn with my family. I was running on fumes, giving pieces of myself to a job that didn't care, and a mother who only called when she needed a transfer. "It's just coffee," I deflected, turning to go. "Stay warm." "Okay." I turned toward the street, reaching into my pocket for my car keys. My fingers were so numb they felt like wooden blocks. I fumbled. Clatter. The keys slipped from my grasp and vanished into a snowbank that had piled up against the curb. No. I panicked. I dropped to my knees in the snow, digging frantically. The slush instantly soaked through my jeans. I shoved my hands into the freezing white powder, sweeping back and forth. The cold was agonizing. Felt like fire burning my skin. I couldn't feel the metal. My hands were seizing up, refusing to obey my brain. I was going to be late. I was going to lose the client. I was going to lose my job. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and humiliating. "Stop," a voice said above me. A hand reached down. The old man. He didn't dig. He simply pointed to a small glint of silver near the tire, 3 feet from where I was digging. "There," he said. I scrambled over, grabbed the keys, and stood up, brushing the snow from my pants. My hands were violently shaking now, bright red and useless. I couldn't even zip my coat back up. The man set his coffee down on the crate. He began to pull off his gloves. They were not what I expected. They were leather, rich, dark chocolate leather that looked soft and supple. They were lined with something thick and dark. They looked expensive. They looked like something a CEO would wear, not a man sleeping behind a bakery. "Here," he said, holding them out to me. "What? No." I stammered, backing away. "I can't take your gloves. You need them. Please keep them." "I have pockets," he said, shoving his bare hands into his windbreaker. "And I'm used to the cold. You are not. Your hands are turning blue." "Those look nice," I said. "You should sell them. Get some food." He let out a short, dry laugh. "Sell them? No. Some things have value that cannot be traded for a sandwich." He stepped closer, invading my personal space just enough to force the issue. "Put them on. Don't ruin your hands for people who aren't worth it." I froze. People who aren't worth it. How did he know? Did he see the way I checked my phone, terrified of a text from my mother? Did he see the exhaustion of a woman trying to prove her worth to a family that only saw her as an ATM? "Take them," he commanded gently. My resistance crumbled. I was in pain. I took the gloves. They were still warm from his hands. I slid my right hand in. It was shocking. Usually, men's gloves are bulky on me. The fingers too long, the palms too wide. But as I slid my hand into the soft cashmere lining, the leather seemed to conform to my skin instantly. The finger length was perfect. The thumb hit exactly where my thumb hit. It was unnerving, like stepping into a pair of shoes that had already been broken in by your own feet. "They fit," I whispered, staring at my hands. "Sometimes," the man said, picking up his coffee again. "The most expensive things are forgotten because people only look at the packaging." He looked at my car, then back at the subway entrance down the block. "Go. Your client is waiting." "Wait," I said, reaching for my wallet again. "Let me give you." "I don't want your money," he said, his voice hardening slightly. "Just keep your hands warm." He turned and walked away. He didn't shuffle. He walked with a stride that was purposeful, heading toward the subway stairs. He merged into a group of commuters, and in the blink of an eye he was gone. Just a gray coat in a gray city. I stood there for a moment, the snow piling up on my shoulders. I looked down at the gloves. They were beautiful. The leather was full grain, aging gracefully with a patina that suggested they were decades old, but meticulously cared for. I turned my wrist over there, stitched discreetly into the leather on the inside of the wrist. Was a symbol. It wasn't a brand logo like Gucci or Prada. It was two letters embroidered in a subtle dark thread that you would miss if you weren't looking for it. A W and an E, locked together in an intricate Gothic script. My stomach did a slow flip. I had seen that script before. Not in a store, not in a magazine. I had seen it in the bottom drawer of my mother's vanity, on an old yellowing envelope she had snatched out of my hands when I was 10 years old. Trash, she had snapped. Just old trash from people who died a long time ago. Never mention that symbol again. Addison, why was a homeless man wearing gloves with the same crest that my mother was terrified of? My phone buzzed in the car. The warning, 5% battery. I shook myself out of the trance. I had to move. I got into the car and cranked the engine. The heat was still blowing cold, but my hands were enveloped in a luxurious warmth. I brought my hands up to the steering wheel. A scent hit me. It wasn't the smell of the street or stale coffee or unwashed clothes. The gloves smelled of cedar wood and pipe tobacco. It was a rich, masculine, comforting smell. It smelled like a library in a mansion. It smelled like safety. I drove to the showing on autopilot. The condo was small. The client was picky. And I smiled and nodded and pointed out the granite countertops while my mind was miles away. Back in the snow with the man with the silver beard. When I finally got home that night, it was past 8 o'clock. My apartment was a studio in a walk-up that smelled permanently of the neighbor's curry. I collapsed onto my sofa, not even bothering to take off my coat. I pulled the gloves off slowly, treating them like artifacts. Under the harsh light of my kitchen lamp, I saw a detail I had missed outside. On the left glove, along the ridge of the thumb, there was a deep, jagged scratch. It was an old scar in the leather, healed over by time and polish. It looked like the wearer had caught their hand on something sharp, maybe a fence or a wire. Years ago, it gave the gloves character, proved they had a history. I set them on the table. They looked out of place against the peeling laminate surface. They demanded a mahogany desk. My phone dinged. A notification from my email app. I rubbed my eyes, probably my boss. Calvin asking about the showing feedback or a bill. It was always a bill. I unlocked the screen. The sender was unfamiliar. Hallow and Brigg LLP. My heart skipped a beat. A law firm. I hadn't hit anyone with my car. I paid my rent on time. I opened the email. Subject: regarding the Gray family file. Dear Ms. Gray, we are attempting to locate a specific individual regarding a matter of final asset distribution. Your name has surfaced in connection with a dormant trust linked to the maternal line of your family. We have been instructed to execute a search for a specific item of personal property that acts as a signifier for the beneficiary. We are looking for the person who has received the gloves. The phone slipped from my hand and landed on the cushion. I looked at the screen. I looked at the gloves on the table. The cedar scent seemed to fill the tiny room, thick and suffocating. We are looking for the person who has received the gloves. The man in the snow didn't just give me warm hands. He had marked me. The cursor blinked at the end of the sentence, a rhythmic, mocking pulse on my cracked phone screen. We are looking for the person who has received the gloves. For a long minute I didn't breathe. My apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the wind rattling the single-pane window. I reached out and touched the leather of the gloves lying on my table. They were real. The email was real. I scrolled down. The body of the email shifted from the mysterious inquiry about the gloves to a dense wall of legalese that made my eyes blur. It was an attachment labeled Final Disbursement Statement. Gray Family Trust Beneficiary. Addison Gray. My heart hammered against my ribs. A trust. A family trust. Growing up, the narrative in the Gray household was etched in stone. We were struggling. We were barely scraping by. My mother, Marianne, and my stepfather, Tom Rhee, had turned financial anxiety into a spectator sport. Every time I asked for new sneakers for gym class, I got a lecture on the cost of heating oil when I needed braces. I was told to smile with my mouth closed because we just don't have that kind of money. Addison. I clicked the attachment. It downloaded painfully slowly on my cheap Wi-Fi. When the PDF finally popped open, I scanned for the bottom line. I expected nothing or maybe a few hundred enough for groceries. The number at the bottom was $3,412.18. I stared at it. $3,000. It wasn't a fortune. In fact, it was an insult, but not because it was a small amount. It was an insult because of the context. Above that final number was a transaction history that spanned 20 years. My eyes widened as I scrolled up. The initial principal of the trust, dated back to the year I was born, was not $3,000. It was substantial. I couldn't see the exact starting figure because it was redacted in black blocks, but I could see the withdrawals. Administrative fee $15,000 paid to T. Reese Consulting. Lifestyle maintenance adjustment $8,000 paid to M. Gray. Educational support supplement $22,000 paid to Blair Rhee. I stopped breathing again. Blair, my half-sister. Blair Rhee, 3 years younger than me. The golden child with the blonde highlights and the perfectly curated Instagram feed. Blair, who is currently a mom influencer living in a sprawling colonial in the suburbs, posting photos of her beige living room with captions about the struggle of motherhood and finding your tribe. I remembered the year that $22,000 was withdrawn. That was the year Blair went to a private arts college to study digital media. That same year, I was a sophomore at the State University working double shifts at a diner to pay for my textbooks because Tom had told me, staring me dead in the eye, "We can't help you, Addie. The market is down. You need to pull your own weight." I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. It wasn't just sadness. It was the specific metallic taste of betrayal. I kept scrolling. Emergency travel stipend $6,000. That was the year they went to Cabo. I wasn't invited because I had to work. Vehicle lease assistance. $12,000. That was the year Tom got the new truck. They had drained it. They had drained a fund that was legally in my name, or at least designated for the Gray family, and they had funneled it into their own pockets under the guise of management fees and necessary expenses. I sat back in my creaky chair. the light from the screen illuminating the peeling paint on my kitchen wall. I thought about my student loans. I was 29 and I was still drowning in $40,000 of debt. I ate ramen 4 nights a week. I wore a coat with a broken zipper. I drove a car that sounded like a lawnmower. And all this time there had been money, my money, or at least money intended to help me. I closed my eyes and a memory surfaced, sharp and stinging. I was 12. I had found an old box in the attic, a box that smelled of cedar and dust. Inside was a silver rattle and a heavy leather-bound ledger. I had run downstairs to show my mother. Excited, Marian had turned from the stove, her face going pale, then twisted with a sudden ugly rage. She snatched the box from me. "Don't you ever go digging through my things, Addison?" she had screamed. "Do not dig up the past. You are ungrateful. We put a roof over your head. And you look for reasons to be unhappy. Ungrateful." That was her favorite word for me. My phone buzzed again, vibrating against the table. The screen lit up with a text message. "Mom, did you get the email from the lawyers? Just sign the release form. It's just some leftover scraps closing out an old account. Don't overthink it." I stared at the message. She knew. She had timed it. A second text followed immediately. "Mom. Also, Tom and I are heading to the lake house this weekend. Blair has that charity gala on Saturday night. We need you to watch the twins. Be there by 5 on Friday. No question. No. Are you free? No. How are you? Just a demand." I looked at the timestamps, the email from the lawyer, the text from my mother. It was a coordinated strike. They wanted me to sign the release, take the $3,000, and shut up. They wanted me to be the good little soldier, the free babysitter, the silent doormat. I looked at the breakdown again. Consulting fees, reimbursements. It was legal theft. They had structured it so perfectly that on paper, they were just managers taking a cut. But in reality, they had cannibalized my future to fund their present. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I wanted to scream. I wanted to type out every curse word I knew. I wanted to drive to their house and throw the printout in their faces. But then my gaze drifted back to the gloves. They sat there on the table, dark and solid. The leather absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. I reached out and picked up the left glove. I ran my thumb over the scratch, the scar that the homeless man had worn. "Don't let your hands get ruined by people who aren't worth it." The old man's voice echoed in my head, clearer than the wind outside. He had been a stranger, a man living on the street. He had half a bagel and a cup of coffee to his name. And yet he had seen me shivering. He had seen my pain. And he had given me the only thing of value he possessed. He had protected me, my own mother. The woman who had birthed me had spent 20 years stealing from me to buy oversized sunglasses and trips to Mexico. The contrast was so stark it made me nauseous. A stranger in a blizzard had shown me more genuine care in 5 minutes than my family had in a lifetime. I put the glove on. The warmth was immediate. It wasn't just physical warmth. It felt like armor. I looked at the phone again. "We need you to watch the twins." Blair's kids were cute, but Blair herself was a nightmare. If I went, I would be subjected to her backhanded compliments. "Oh, Addie, you look so tired. Have you tried that collagen powder I'm selling? Use my code." I would spend the weekend cleaning up sticky messes while they drank champagne and pretended to be philanthropists. And if I asked about the trust, if I asked about the $22,000 for her college, I knew exactly what would happen. Marian would cry. Tom would get red in the face and talk about sacrifice. Blair would look at me with pity and say, "Oh, honey, why are you always so obsessed with money? It's not a good look." They didn't love me. They loved that I was useful. They loved that I was the designated loser of the family. The one whose struggles made their success look even brighter. I wasn't a daughter. I was a prop. I took a deep breath. The air in the apartment felt stale. But inside the gloves, my hands felt capable, strong. I picked up the phone. I didn't type a scream. I didn't type a curse. I typed 2 words. Me. No. I stared at it. It looked incredibly short, incredibly powerful. I hit send. Then I turned my attention back to the lawyer's email. Holloway and Brigg. I Googled them. They weren't a strip mall law firm. They were a boutique firm in the city known for high net worth estate planning. Why would a firm like that be handling a trust that had been drained down to $3,000? Unless trust wasn't the main point. We are looking for the person who has received the gloves. The email said they were looking for a signifier, a specific item. I looked at the stitched letters on the wrist, the W and the E. My mother had called it trash. She had forbidden me from asking about it. Why would you forbid a child from asking about trash? You only forbid questions about things that are dangerous, things that hold power. I realized then that the $3,000 wasn't a gift. It was a hush payment. It was the crumbs they were tossing me to close the book before I realized there was a whole library they were hiding. My phone buzzed again. Mom, what do you mean? No, Mom. Addison, don't be difficult. Blair is counting on you. We already told the nanny she could have the weekend off. Pick up the phone, Addison. We need to discuss your attitude. I watched the messages roll in one after another. Panic, control, anger. Usually, this barrage would make me crumble. I would apologize. I would get in my car and drive to their house, begging for forgiveness. But tonight, I just watched the screen light up. Feeling oddly detached, I looked at the gloves. I imagined the old man sitting on his crate, watching the world with those sharp gray eyes. He hadn't panicked. He hadn't begged. I wasn't going to beg either. Not anymore. I went to my laptop and hit reply to the law firm. Dear Holloway and Brigg, I am in possession of the item you described. A pair of men's leather gloves, dark brown, size large. There is a monogram on the inner wrist. I am available to meet. Sincerely, Addison Gray. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. Then I turned off my phone. I sat in the silence of my apartment, wearing the gloves of a homeless man. The leather creaked softly as I made a fist. For 29 years, I had been trying to earn a seat at a table where I was never welcome. I had been trying to be good enough for people who were actively robbing me. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snowy street below. The city was white and quiet. Somewhere out there, the old man was sleeping in the cold. Or maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was exactly where he wanted to be. A strange thought occurred to me. A dangerous thought. If the gloves were the key, what kind of door did they open? My mother had spent her life running from the past, hiding symbols, burning bridges. She was terrified of something, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of her fear. I was curious about it. I looked at my reflection in the dark window, a tired woman in a cheap sweater wearing expensive gloves. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. Let's see what you're hiding. The revenge didn't start with a scream. It didn't start with a gun or a lawsuit. It started with a pair of warm hands and the realization that I was done shivering. I went to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a fresh notepad. I didn't open my work email. I didn't check the MLS listings for tomorrow. I sat down and wrote a header at the top of the page. The discrepancies underneath. I began to list everything I could remember. Every time my mother had been vague about money. Every time Tom had intercepted the mail. Every time Blair had suddenly acquired something expensive right after a family meeting I wasn't invited to. 1. The college fund withdrawal 2014. 2. The investment loss explanation for my first car, 2012. 3. The box in the attic, 2005. for the symbol we pen scratched against the paper. The list was growing. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a witness building a case. Tomorrow, I wouldn't just be a realtor showing houses I couldn't afford. Tomorrow, I would be a detective in my own life. I looked at the gloves one last time before taking them off to sleep. I placed them on the nightstand right next to my pillow. They smelled of cedar. They smelled of truth. And as I closed my eyes, I realized the scariest thing wasn't the legal letter or my mother's anger. The scariest thing was how ready I was to burn it all down to find out who I really was. The morning sun did not bring warmth. It only brought a harsh, blinding clarity to the peeling paint on my windowsill and the cheap laminate of my kitchen table. I sat there with a mug of black coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. My entire world narrowed down to the pair of dark leather gloves resting on the placemat. I had slept fitfully, dreaming of snowstorms and faceless men in boardrooms. Now awake, the logic of the daylight tried to take over. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself it was just a random encounter with a kind stranger. But then I would look at that email again. We are looking for the person who has received the gloves, and the logic would shatter. I picked up the left glove again. It was heavy, the leather thick and substantial. My thumb traced the scar on the outside, but this time I turned my attention to the inside. I inverted the wrist, straining the leather slightly to see the lining. It was cashmere, soft and dark. But as I pressed my fingers along the inner seam near the mysterious W&E monogram, I felt something rigid. It was not a lump of stitching. It was a geometric shape, hard and flat, hidden between the leather shell and the cashmere lining. My heart did a nervous flutter. I grabbed a pair of tweezers from my bathroom kit. There was a tiny gap in the hem, almost invisible to the naked eye, where the stitching had been left intentionally loose. It was not a tear, it was a pocket. I worked the tweezers in, pinching the hard object with a gentle tug. It slid out. It was a small rectangular metal tag. It looked like brass, tarnished by time, but heavy in my palm. It wasn't a piece of jewelry. It looked industrial, functional. I held it up to the light. Engraved deeply into the metal were 3 words and a number. Whitlock Storage Unit 19. The air left my lungs in a sharp hiss. Whitlock. The name hit me with the force of a suppressed memory fighting its way to the surface. I was 7 years old, sitting under the dining table playing with my dolls, listening to my grandmother and my mother argue in the kitchen. My grandmother, a woman with nervous hands and eyes that always looked at the door, had lowered her voice to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. You cannot run forever. Marianne, the Whitlock shadow is long. Do not mention that name. If you mention Whitlock, they will come looking and we have nothing left to give them. My mother had smashed a plate. Then I remembered the sound of the china shattering. She had screamed that the name was dead, that we were Grays, that we were Reeses, that we were anything but that. I had never heard the name spoken aloud since. It was a ghost word in our house, banned not by rule, but by a terrifying, unspoken agreement. And now here it was stamped on a piece of brass that had been handed to me by a homeless man in a blizzard. I looked at the tag, then at the gloves. Who was he? I closed my eyes and tried to summon his face. Not the beard, not the old coat, but the man underneath. I replayed our interaction. He hadn't shuffled. He hadn't mumbled. When he handed me the gloves, he didn't look at the ground. He looked at my eyes. He spoke in complete sentences. Sometimes the most expensive things are forgotten because people only look at the packaging. That wasn't the rambling of a man lost to the streets. That was an observation of philosophy and his posture. He sat on that milk crate with a spine of steel. He commanded the space around him. I grabbed my keys. I needed to know. I drove back to the bakery. The snowplows had finally come through, pushing dirty gray slush into mountains against the curbs. The city looked hungover. Recovering from the storm, I parked illegally and ran into the bakery. The morning shift girl was there arranging pastries. She looked at me blankly when I described him. A homeless guy, honey. This is Pittsburgh. There's a guy outside every day. No, I insisted. He had a silver beard, intense eyes. He was sitting right there. I pointed to the spot. She shrugged. I don't pay attention. Sorry. I went outside and walked to the subway entrance nearby. The wind was still biting, but I had my new gloves on. My hands were toasty warm. I went down the stairs into the station. It smelled of ozone and damp wool. I asked the ticket booth attendant. Nothing. I asked a commuter who looked like a regular. Nothing. Then I saw a janitor emptying a trash can near the turnstiles. He was an older man moving with the slow rhythm of someone who had been doing this job for 30 years. Excuse me, I said, approaching him. I'm looking for a man who was sitting upstairs yesterday. Older, silver beard, navy windbreaker. The janitor stopped tying the bag. He looked at me, then at the gloves on my hands. His gaze lingered there for a second too long. The professor, he said. The professor. That's what I call him, the janitor said, leaning on his broom. He ain't like the others. Doesn't drink, doesn't beg, just sits, watches. Sometimes he reads newspapers that people throw away, but he reads the finance section, checks the stocks. Where is he? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. I need to return something to him. The janitor shook his head. Gone. He's been there every day for 3 months. Rain, snow didn't matter. But last night after the storm got bad, I saw him get on the blue line. He didn't look like he was coming back. He looked like the janitor paused, searching for the word. Like he was done waiting. Done waiting. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter air went down my spine. He was waiting and then he met me and then he left. It wasn't a chance encounter. It was a handoff. I thanked the janitor and ran back to my car. I pulled out my phone and typed Whitlock Storage Pittsburgh into the GPS. It wasn't a self-storage facility near the highway with roll-up orange doors. It was a building in the Strip District, an old repurposed warehouse made of red brick and black iron. When I pulled up 20 minutes later, I realized my mistake. I couldn't just walk in with a brass tag and open a locker. The building was a fortress. There was a wrought iron gate blocking the entrance controlled by a keypad. Cameras were mounted on every corner, their red eyes blinking in the gray light. The sign out front was discreet. Gold lettering on black granite. Whitlock Private Storage. Established 1922. This wasn't for old furniture and Christmas decorations. This was where people stored art, wine, and secrets. I sat in my idling car staring at the gate. My realtor instincts kicked in. If I tried to sneak in, I would be arrested. If I walked up and banged on the door, I would be ignored. This place screamed exclusive. I looked at the tag again. Unit 19. I pulled up the number for the facility on my phone. My thumb hovered over the call button. I had to play this cool. I had to be professional Addison Gray, not panicked. Addison Gray, I dialed. Whitlock Storage. Good afternoon. A woman's voice answered smooth, professional, and utterly detached. Hi, I said, pitching my voice to my client-pleasing register. My name is Addison Gray. I believe I have a key, or rather a tag, for one of your units. I was hoping to come by and verify the access. Do you have the unit number? She asked. Unit 19. There was a silence on the other end. Not a pause, but a heavy, deliberate silence. I could hear typing in the background. Ms. Gray. The voice returned, and the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. Unit 19 is currently under a legal administrative hold. Access is restricted pending authorized biometric verification. Biometric, I repeated. But I have the tag. The tag is merely a reference. Ma'am, it is not the key, and given the status of the account, I would advise you not to attempt entry. Security has been notified of the inquiry. Click. She hung up. I stared at the phone. Security has been notified. I had poked the bear. I sat back in my seat, my heart racing. Biometric verification, legal administrative hold. This wasn't just a storage unit. This was a vault. And the old man, the professor, had given me the tag, knowing full well I couldn't get in. Or maybe he knew I could, but not yet. Why give me the gloves? We are looking for the person who has received the gloves. The lawyers were looking for the person. The storage unit was locked. The two things were connected by a thread I couldn't quite see yet. My phone buzzed in my hand, making me jump. I expected the lawyers again, or maybe the police. It was a text message. Mom, Addison, I haven't seen the transfer notification yet. I stared at the screen, blinking. The shift in reality was jarring. 1 minute I was unraveling a century-old family mystery involving high-security vaults. The next I was being shaken down by my mother for cash. Mom, we need $2,500 for the deposit on the Cabo Villa. Tom's bonus is delayed until next month, and we need to lock in the rate today. Also, don't forget you need to be at Blair's by 5 on Friday. Her nanny has the flu. I read the message 3 times. $2,500. That was almost exactly the amount left in the trust fund she had told me to sign away yesterday. The audacity was breathtaking. It was almost art. She wanted me to sign a document releasing her from liability for stealing my inheritance, take the scraps left over, and then immediately transfer those scraps back to her so she could go on vacation. And on top of that, she wanted me to babysit for free so my sister could go to a party. I looked at the high-security gates of Whitlock Storage. I looked at the expensive leather gloves on my hands. For 29 years I had said, yes, yes, Mom, I understand. Yes, Mom, I'll wait on the new shoes. Yes, Mom, I'll lend you my commission check. I had said yes because I thought if I paid enough into the emotional bank account of my family, eventually I would be allowed to make a withdrawal. I thought eventually they would love me back. But looking at that text, seeing the casual entitlement, I realized the truth. It wasn't a bank account. It was a black hole. Nothing I threw in there would ever fill it up. They would take the $2,500, go to Cabo, and come back complaining about the flight while I ate ramen and paid off their management fees. I felt a physical shift in my chest. Felt like a cable snapping. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel the familiar guilt that usually twisted my stomach when I disappointed them. I felt cold. I felt clear. I typed the response. I didn't offer an excuse. I didn't lie and say I didn't have the money. I didn't apologize. Me? No, just 2 letters. I watched the bubble turn blue as it sent. Mom, excuse me, Mom. Addison, is this a joke? We are counting on you. Tom is going to be furious. Mom, you are being incredibly selfish. After everything we've done for you, I put the phone in the cup holder face down. I looked up at the gray sky. The snow had stopped, but the air was still heavy. I had just started a war. I knew it. Saying no to a narcissist is an act of aggression. They wouldn't take this lying down. They would come for me. They would guilt me, threaten me, maybe even try to ruin me. But as I put the car in gear and pulled away from the gates of the Whitlock vault, I realized something else. I had the gloves, I had the tag, and I had the name they were terrified of. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a loose end, and loose ends are dangerous. I drove back toward the city, my hands gripping the wheel, feeling the texture of the leather against my skin. I had crossed a line, an invisible electric fence that separated the beautiful daughter from the enemy. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of cedar and old tobacco. Okay, I said aloud. Let's see what happens when I stop paying for your love. The silence that followed my text message lasted exactly 4 minutes. Then my phone began to vibrate against the table surface like a trapped insect. It was not a text this time. It was a call. The screen flashed the word mother. In the past, seeing that name would have triggered a Pavlovian response of guilt and anxiety. I would have answered immediately, pitching my voice up an octave, ready to apologize for whatever crime I had unknowingly committed. Today, I let it ring 3 times. I took a sip of my cold coffee. I looked at the leather gloves resting near the fruit bowl. Then, I slid the green icon across the screen. "Hello," I said. "Addison." My mother's voice came through, but it was not the screeching tone I expected. It was soft. It was the voice she used when she wanted a table at a fully booked restaurant or when she was trying to charm a discount out of a contractor. "Addie, honey, I think there has been a misunderstanding. Your text was a little abrupt." "It was clear," I said. I said no. "I know you are stressed," she purred. "I know work is hard, but we are family and right now the family is in a bind. We need that deposit for the trip. It is for everyone's mental health. You know how hard Tom works. You know how exhausted Blair is with the babies. I know how hard I work," I said, my voice steady. "I work 6 days a week. I drive a car that fails to start if it rains too hard. And yet, you are asking me for $2,500. "It is a loan," she said quickly. "Just a bridge loan until the bonus clears." "Like the bridge loan for the car repair in 2018, I asked. "Or the loan for the roof repair that Tom said the insurance would cover." There was a pause. The sweetness in her voice began to curdle. "Why are you bringing up ancient history that is petty, Addison? That is unbecoming." "I am bringing up history because I read the trust fund statement," I said. The silence on the other end was absolute. It was the sound of a vacuum sealing shut. I saw the withdrawals. "Mom," I continued, feeling a strange icy heat in my chest. "I saw the administrative fees paid to Tom. I saw the $22,000 for Blair's college tuition. I saw the travel stipends. That was for managing the assets." She snapped, the mask slipping completely. "You have no idea how complex these things are. We did that for you to protect the capital." "You drained the capital," I said. "You protected nothing. You used my name to fund your lifestyle. Give me the phone." A male voice growled in the background. There was a fumbling sound. And then my stepfather, Tom, was on the line. He did not use the sweet voice. Tom believed in intimidation. He was a man who thought volume equaled authority. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat," he barked. "We took you in. We raised you. That money was family money. It was ours to allocate. It was in a trust for the beneficiary." I said, "That is me. Don't you dare quote legal terms at me." Tom shouted, "You want to play hardball? Fine. I know people in this town. I know your boss, Calvin. We play golf at the club. How do you think it will look if I give him a call tomorrow? If I tell him his junior agent is having a mental breakdown? If I tell him you are financially unstable and harassing your own mother?" My hand tightened around the phone. It was a classic move. Threaten the reputation. Threaten the livelihood. "Are you threatening my job, Tom?" I asked. "I am telling you to be a good daughter," he hissed. "Transfer the money, be at Blair's on Friday, or I make a call that ends your little career at Graybridge. Do you understand me?" I looked at the gloves. I imagined the old man, Elias, or whatever his name really was, standing in the snow. He wouldn't tremble at a man like Tom. He would laugh. "Do it," I said. "What?" Tom sounded stunned. "Call him," I said. "But if you do, make sure you tell him about the forensic audit I'm going to request on the trust fund. I am sure his golf buddies would love to hear about how you managed a fiduciary account." I hung up. My hands were shaking, but only slightly. I put the phone down. I did not cry. I felt lightheaded, as if I had just stepped off a ledge and found I could float. Almost immediately, the text messages began. They shifted from my parents to my sister. Blair, Mom is crying. I hope you are happy. Blair, I don't understand why you are being so cruel. I have 2 babies. Addie, I am drowning here. I just wanted one night out. Is that too much to ask, Blair? You have no kids. You have no responsibilities. You just hoard your money and judge us. It must be nice to be so perfect. I read the messages. Hoard my money. The irony was so thick. Tasted like blood. I had $40 in my checking account. Blair was driving a Range Rover leased by my mother. I did not reply. I did not engage. Instead, I took a screenshot of every text. I screenshotted the call log showing the duration of the conversation with my mother. I opened a new folder on my laptop cloud drive and named it Documentation. I dragged the PDF of the trust fund statement into it. I dragged the screenshots in. I was building a wall brick by brick. The next morning, I walked into Graybridge Really & Company with my spine straight. I wore the leather gloves into the lobby, only taking them off when I reached my desk. They sat next to my keyboard like a silent partner. Gray. A voice boomed from the corner office. It was Calvin Rowe, my boss. My stomach dropped. Had Tom actually called? I walked into his office. Calvin was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite and dressed by an Italian tour. He was tough, demanding, and had zero patience for drama. "Sit down," he said, not looking up from a stack of files. I sat. I braced myself for the lecture. I braced myself to be fired. "I have a problem," Calvin said, tossing a thick folder across the mahogany desk. "And you are going to solve it?" I looked at the folder. It wasn't my personnel file. It was a listing agreement. "The Sterling penthouse," Calvin said, "top floor of the Dominion Tower, for $1 million. The seller is impatient. The previous agent was an idiot who couldn't screen buyers. I need someone who is hungry and isn't going to drop the ball." I stared at him. "You want me to take the Sterling listing?" "I want you to run the open house this Thursday evening," he said. "It is a VIP twilight event. Invite only champagne hors d'oeuvres. The works. If you sell it, the commission is yours. If you screw it up, don't come in on Friday." He looked at me then, his eyes narrowing. "You look different today. Gray, you look focused." "I am," I said. "Good. Don't make me regret this." I walked out of the office with the file clutched to my chest. This was it. This was the break I had been working toward for 5 years. A $4 million listing meant a commission that would wipe out my credit card debt in a single stroke. But then a cold thought washed over me. Tom knew I worked here. Blair knew. They knew my schedule. If Tom was vindictive enough to threaten my job, he was vindictive enough to ruin a public event. I imagined my mother showing up at the open house, making a scene, crying in front of millionaires. I imagined Blair bringing her screaming toddlers to a black tie twilight showing just to sabotage me. I stopped at my desk. I looked at the gloves. "Protect yourself," they seemed to say. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had saved from a previous commercial listing. "Ironclad Security. This is Addison Gray at Graybridge. I need to hire a detail for an event this Thursday. Yes, just one guard, but I need someone imposing, someone who can handle domestic disturbances." I spent the next hour printing out photos. One of my mother, one of Tom, one of Blair. I wrote their names underneath in black marker. When the security contractor arrived to pick up the deposit and the brief, I handed him the envelope. "These people are not allowed entry," I said, my voice flat. "Under any circumstances, if they show up, they are to be removed quietly if possible, forcefully if necessary." The guard, A man named Marcus with shoulders the width of a doorframe looked at the photos. Family? He asked, noting the resemblance. No, I said, looking him in the eye. Liabilities? Felt terrible. It felt like I was cutting off a limb. But as Marcus walked away with the photos of my mother and sister, I felt the weight lift. I was not leaving my safety up to their mercy anymore. I was buying insurance. That night, the temperature dropped again. I sat in my apartment, the only light coming from the street lamps outside. I had the gloves on. I found myself wearing them even inside now. They were the only things that felt real. My laptop chimed. A new email. My heart rate spiked. It was Halloway and Brigg again. Subject: identity verification required. Reference case 8992. Dear Miss Gray, thank you for your prompt response regarding the item in your possession. Given the sensitive nature of the asset distribution, we require an in-person verification of both the claimant and the item. Please present yourself at our offices at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Bring the item with you. Do not discuss this appointment with any third parties. Sincerely, Dana Kessler, Senior Partner. I read the email twice. Sensitive nature. Do not discuss. They weren't asking for the gloves back. They were asking to see me with the gloves. I looked down at my hands. The leather was dark and supple. I rubbed the thumb over the mysterious W&E monogram. Who are you? I whispered to the empty room. The question hung in the air. Was I walking into a trap? Was this old man, this Elias, actually some senile tycoon who had given away a family heirloom by mistake? And now his lawyers were going to threaten me with theft if I didn't hand it over. Or was it something else? I remembered the tag. Whitlock Storage. I remembered the fear in my grandmother's voice. I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. It was the terrifying electric sensation of the unknown. For 29 years, my life had been a small, predictable room with shrinking walls. Now, someone had handed me a sledgehammer. I was afraid. I was terrified that I would go to this law firm and they would laugh at me. They would take the gloves, give me $100 for my trouble, and send me back to my life of debt and emotional abuse. But looking at the gloves, I felt that phantom grip again, a steady hand on my shoulder. Don't let your hands hold because of people who aren't worth it. I wasn't going back. Couldn't go back. I opened my calendar and blocked out the morning. I would tell Calvin I had a dentist appointment. I replied to the lawyer. Me, I will be there. I turned off the light in the darkness. The gloves seemed to absorb the shadows. I slept with them on the nightstand, my hand resting just inches away from the leather, as if reaching for a lifeline in a storm. Tomorrow I would meet the lawyers. Thursday I would sell the penthouse. I was done being Addison the victim. I was ready to meet whoever Addison Gray was supposed to be before I faced the lions at Halloway and Brigg. I needed to arm myself with history. I needed to know what ground I was standing on before the lawyers tried to pull it out from under me. I drove out to the suburbs, but not to the manicured, soulless development where my mother and Blair lived. I went to the older part of town to a small, weathered bungalow with a porch that sagged slightly in the middle. This was where my Aunt Nora and Uncle Dean lived. Nora was my mother's older sister, but they were as different as oil and water, where Marianne was sharp edges and calculated affection. Nora was soft, worn flannel, and the smell of baking bread. She and Dean had never had much money. Dean was a retired mechanic and Nora worked part-time at the library, but they had always given me the one thing my own home lacked: peace. When I knocked, Nora answered in her apron, her face lighting up with genuine delight. "Addie, oh, look at you. You're freezing. Come in. Come in." She ushered me into the warmth of the kitchen, which smelled of cinnamon and coffee. I sat at the familiar oak table while Dean shuffled in from the living room, wiping grease from his hands on a rag. "Hey there, kiddo. Car running okay. It's running, Uncle Dean. That's all I ask of it. I smiled, but the smile felt tight. I accepted the mug of tea Nora placed in front of me, wrapping my hands around it. I hadn't taken the gloves off yet. I had been wearing them since I left my apartment. Nora noticed them immediately. Her eyes dropped to my hands and her smile faltered. "Those are very nice gloves, Addie. Knew someone gave them to me," I said quietly. "Nora, I need to ask you something. Something about the family history that Mom won't talk about." Nora's expression tightened. She exchanged a quick, nervous glance with Dean. "What kind of history?" I took a deep breath and placed my hands on the table, palms down. I turned my left wrist over, exposing the inner lining where the monogram was stitched, the W and the E in that Gothic interlocking script. "Do you know what this symbol means?" Nora leaned in, squinting. Then all the color drained from her face. She reached out a trembling hand, but didn't touch the leather as if it were hot iron. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Where did you get those?" "A man," I said, "an older man, homeless. He gave them to me in the blizzard." Nora looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. "That is not just a symbol, Addison. That is the Whitlock crest." "Whitlock," I repeated, the name tasting like ash. The storage unit tag said Whitlock. "Who are they?" "They were royalty in the city," Dean said, his voice grave. He pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "Before the steel mills shut down, before the tech companies moved in, the Whitlocks owned half of Pittsburgh. Real estate, railroads, you name it. Old money, the kind of money that doesn't shout." "Why was Mom so afraid of that name?" I asked. "Why did Grandma forbid us from saying it?" Nora got up and walked to the sideboard. She opened a drawer and rummaged through a stack of old papers, her hands shaking. She pulled out a small, tattered photo album. It wasn't the official family album my mother kept on the coffee table. This was a cheap plastic one. She flipped through the pages until she found a black and white photograph that had been torn in half. The edges were jagged. "Your mother, she was wild when she was young. Addie, before she met Tom, before she settled down to become the perfect suburban housewife, she ran away when she was 19. Disappeared for almost 2 years. We didn't know if she was dead or alive." Nora slid the photo across the table. It showed a young woman, unmistakably my mother, but with longer, wilder hair and a smile I had never seen on her face. A smile of pure, reckless joy. She was leaning against the railing of a boat. Next to her, where the photo was torn, was the arm and shoulder of a man. He was wearing a suit, and on his hand, resting on the railing next to hers, was a dark leather glove. I looked closer. There was a scratch on the thumb, a jagged, distinct scar in the leather. I looked down at the glove on my own hand. The scratch was identical. The room spun. "She came back 2 years later," Nora said softly. "She was pregnant with you. She never said who the father was. She just said he was gone and that we were never to speak of that time again. She burned everything. Letters, photos. I saved this one from the trash. She said your father was a mistake." Dean added gently, "A drifter who left her. That's the story she's told everyone for 30 years. He wasn't a drifter." I whispered, touching the photo. "He was a Whitlock. If those gloves belong to a Whitlock," Nora said, her voice dropping to a hush. "And you have them, Addison. Honey, you are walking into a fire. That family, they aren't like us. They have lawyers who eat people like us for breakfast. If Marion ran from them, she must have had a reason. Or maybe she was the reason," I said. The realization was cold and sharp. Maybe she didn't run. Maybe she was paid to leave. The trust fund, the administrative fees, the hush money. It all started to fit together like the gears of a complex clock. The money hadn't come from Tom's hard work. It had come from them. And my mother had spent my inheritance, my payoff on herself. You need to be careful, Dean said. He pointed a grease-stained finger at me. If you go poking around the Whitlocks, you better have your armor on. Don't go breaking into storage units. Do it legal. Get a lawyer. If you have a claim, make them acknowledge it on paper. I have an appointment, I said. With Holloway and Brig. Dean whistled low. Top-tier heavy hitters. You watch your back, kid. I hugged them both before I left. Nora held me tight, smelling of yeast and worry. You look so much like him, she whispered in my ear. The man in the photo. You have his eyes, I always wondered. I drove away feeling a strange mixture of warmth and dread. I wasn't just Addison Gray, the broke realtor, anymore. I was a secret that had been kept for 29 years. My phone chimed as I pulled onto the highway. I braced myself for another attack from my mother, but it wasn't a text. It was an Instagram notification. Blair, Reese has mentioned you in their story. I pulled into a gas station parking lot to check it. I shouldn't have looked, but I had to know the battlefield conditions. I opened the app. Blair had posted a video. She was sitting in her car, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face, holding a Starbucks cup. Hey guys! She sniffled into the camera. I don't usually bring family drama onto here, but I am just so heartbroken. My sister, I don't even know who she is anymore. We are going through a really tough time financially, just a temporary thing. And she just turned her back on us, on my kids. It's just so sad when people let money change them. She's become so greedy and cold. If anyone is looking for a realtor in Pittsburgh, maybe think twice about someone who doesn't value family. She didn't tag my professional account directly, but she didn't have to. Her followers knew who I was. I scrolled to the comments. OMG, that's awful. Stay strong, mama. Money is the root of all evil. Who is she? Expose her. I think her sister works at Graybridge. I remember seeing a post. The flying monkeys were mobilizing. She was weaponizing her audience against me. She was painting me as the villain before I had even fired a shot. My hands shook with rage. I wanted to reply. I wanted to post the screenshots of the trust fund theft. I wanted to post the text where she asked for money for a deposit on a vacation while crying poverty. I started to type a furious comment. Tell them about the 22 grand you stole for college, Blair. Then I stopped. I looked at the gloves. Sometimes the most expensive things are forgotten because people only look at the packaging. The old man, my grandfather, hadn't screamed. He hadn't fought for attention. He had waited. He had observed. If I engaged in a mud fight with a pig, we would both get dirty. But the pig would enjoy it. Blair lived for this drama. It fed her engagement metrics. If I fought back online, I looked just as messy as she did. I would look unstable to my clients. I deleted the comment. Instead, I took a screenshot of the video. I took screenshots of the comments that identified my workplace. I opened my documentation folder and uploaded them. I wasn't going to fight her on Instagram. I was going to fight her in a deposition. I was going to fight her with forensic accounting and defamation lawsuits. I put the phone down and took a deep breath. The anger cooled into a hard, dense resolve in my gut. Go ahead, Blair, I said to the silent car. Dig the hole deeper. I was about to put the car in reverse when a new message popped up on my screen. It wasn't from Blair. It wasn't from my mother. It was from an unknown number. No ID. Area code 412. I opened it. Unknown. Are you holding my gloves? I froze. The text didn't say, did you find a pair of gloves or I lost my gloves? It asked if I was holding them. Present tense. As if the sender knew exactly where they were, as if they were watching. I looked around the parking lot. It was just people pumping gas, a delivery truck, a teenager smoking near the air pump. I looked down at the gloves on my hands. They felt heavier suddenly. Was it the old man? Was it Elias? Or was it someone else? Someone who knew what the gloves meant and wanted them back. I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly. Me. Who is this? The 3 dots of the typing indicator appeared instantly. They danced for a second, then vanished, then appeared again. Unknown. The man who gave them to you said they would fit. Do they? It was him or someone speaking for him. I felt a surge of emotion that surprised me. Relief, hope, fear me. Yes, they fit perfectly. Unknown. Good. Keep them close. You are going to need them tomorrow. Do not let them out of your sight. Addison. He knew my name. He knew about tomorrow. He wasn't just a homeless man. He was orchestrating this. I was a piece on a chessboard that I hadn't even known existed, and he had just moved me into position. I started the car. The fear was still there, but it was different now. It wasn't the fear of being crushed by my family. It was the thrill of the ascent. I was climbing a mountain in a blizzard, and for the first time I had the right gear. I stared at the text message from the unknown number. Do not let them out of your sight. Addison. My thumbs hovered over the keypad. The logical part of my brain, the part that organized open houses and filed contracts, was screaming that this was dangerous. I was communicating with a ghost who knew my name and my schedule. But the instinctual part, the part that felt the warmth of the leather against my skin, knew this was my only way out. Me, I want to return them. Where are you? The response was immediate. Unknown. The coffee shop on 5th. 20 minutes, I threw the car into gear. 5th Avenue was only 10 minutes away. I could make it. But 5 minutes later, as I was idling at a red light, another message popped up. Unknown, too crowded. Go to the library on Forbes, 2nd floor reference section. I frowned. Changing lanes. Why the switch? Was he watching me? Was he watching someone else watching me? I was halfway to the library when the phone buzzed a 3rd time. Unknown, abort. Do not stop. Go home. Wait for the instruction. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just a clandestine meeting. This was evasive maneuvering. Someone was afraid of being followed. And if the man who looked like he owned the city, even in rags, was afraid, I should be terrified. I drove home, my eyes darting to the rear-view mirror every few seconds, checking for tail lights that lingered too long. When I got to my apartment, I didn't feel safe. The sanctuary of my tiny studio felt breached. I locked the deadbolt and checked the window. Then my phone exploded. It wasn't a text from the mystery man. It was a notification from Instagram. Then another, then 10 more. A cascade of digital noise that vibrated against the table like a swarm of angry bees. Blair Reese just went live. I opened the app, my heart hammering a rhythm of dread against my ribs. Blair was on screen, but this wasn't the tearful Poor Me video from earlier. This was a produced, calculated piece of theater. She was sitting in her kitchen, the lighting perfectly adjusted to make her look pale and fragile. She held a stack of papers, my papers, or rather forged versions of them. I didn't want to do this, she said, her voice trembling with practiced sorrow. But I have to protect my family. My sister, she didn't just refuse to help us. She has been siphoning money from my parents' retirement accounts for years. We found the statements today. My professional Facebook page, the one I used to showcase listings, was getting review bombed. 1 star, 1 star, 1 star. Unethical agent. Do not trust this woman with your home. Thief. I watched my reputation, something I had built over 5 years of 70-hour weeks and skipped holidays, disintegrate in real time. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. My phone rang. It was a client, Mrs. Gable, the sweet elderly lady whose condo I was listing next week. Addison. Her voice was icy. I just saw a video my granddaughter showed me. Is it true, Mrs. Gable? No, I pleaded, trying to keep my voice steady. My sister is unwell. It is a family dispute. None of it is true. I can't have this kind of drama attached to my sale, she said. I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to go with another agency. Please return my keys. Click. I stared at the phone. One client gone. Then another email. Cancellation of listing agreement. The walls were closing in. Blair wasn't just venting. She was executing a hit. She knew that, as a realtor, my reputation was my currency. If she bankrupted my reputation, she forced me back into dependency. She forced me to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness, ready to sign whatever release forms they wanted just to make it stop. I wanted to scream. I wanted to go on Instagram Live and scream the truth. I wanted to post the bank statements. Don't. A voice inside me whispered, "That's what she wants. She wants a mud fight." I remembered the old man's calm. I remembered the lawyer's email. Identity verification. I took a deep breath. I sat down at my laptop. I did not reply to the comments. I did not post a defense. Instead, I opened my documentation folder. I saved the video. I took screenshots of the slanderous comments. I drafted a cease and desist letter using a template I had learned in real estate law class to Blair Re. Redefamation of character and leal. Demand is hereby made that you immediately remove. I sent it via email and certified mail. It felt flimsy against the tidal wave of hate, but it was a paper trail. Then the kill shot arrived. An email landed in the general inbox of Graybridge, really, with a copy sent to me. It was from an anonymous address, Truth Seeker 412. Subject: formal complaint regarding Agent Addison Gray. Attached was a dossier. It was a crude collage of my real estate transactions mixed with fabricated bank transfers and out-of-context text messages that made it look like I was indeed funneling money from my family. It was clumsy, but to an outsider it looked damning. Gray. I wasn't at the office, but I could hear Calvin's voice in my head. My cell phone rang. It was Calvin. Office now, he barked. I drove to the office in a daze. The city looked hostile now. Every person looking at their phone seemed to be watching Blair's video. Every glance felt like an accusation. When I walked into Graybridge, the reception area was quiet. The receptionist, usually friendly, looked down at her desk as I passed. I walked into Calvin's office. He was standing by the window, looking out at the skyline. The dossier was printed out on his desk. You want to tell me why my inbox is full of hate mail about my junior agent? He asked, not turning around. It is a lie, Calvin? I said, my voice shaking but clear. My sister is retaliating. I refuse to give them money I don't have. She is trying to destroy me. He turned around, his face was unreadable. I run a business, Addison. Perception is reality in this game. If people think you are a thief, you are a liability. I can prove it, I said. I have the real bank statements. I have the trust fund records showing they stole from me. I am meeting with a lawyer tomorrow at Halloway and Brigg to sort this out. Calvin raised an eyebrow. Halloway and Brigg. You? Yes. He looked at me for a long moment. He was a shark, but he was a fair shark. He knew a hustle when he saw one, and he knew I was the hardest worker he had. I am not going to fire you, he said. I let out a breath. But I can't have you front-facing on the floor until this blows over, he continued. I am giving you 48 hours. Fix this. Silence the noise. If the open house on Thursday turns into a circus, you are done. I hired security, I said. Ironclad. They have photos. My family won't get within 100 feet of the penthouse. Calvin nodded slowly. Smart. Good initiative. He tapped the desk. You have 48 hours. Gray, don't drown. I walked out of the office, feeling like I was carrying a 100-pound of lead on my back. 48 hours. It was a lifetime, I sat in my car in the parking garage, the silence ringing in my ears. I pulled the gloves out of my pocket. I hadn't worn them into the meeting. I didn't want to explain them, but now I needed them. I pulled them on. The cedar scent was faint now, masked by the smell of my own fierce sweat, but the warmth was still there. I looked at the text message thread again. Wait for the instruction. I was done waiting. I examined the gloves again. The lawyer had said, "Bring the item." The text had said, "Keep them close." There had to be more. I took the left glove off and turned it inside out again, exposing the pocket where I had found the brass tag. I felt around the lining. Nothing. I tried the right glove. I turned the wrist over. The lining was smooth, but as I ran my fingernail along the seam of the thumb, right under where the external scratch was, I felt a slight catch. It wasn't a pocket this time. It was a layer. I carefully picked at the stitching. It was incredibly delicate, invisible to the eye, but there was a false bottom to the cashmere lining in the thumb. I slid my pinky finger in. I felt something thin, thinner than paper, like onion skin. I pinched it and pulled. It was a strip of translucent tracing paper, folded into a tiny square no bigger than a stamp. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was a handwritten note. The ink was old, faded to a sepia tone, but the handwriting was sharp, angular, and commanding. Holloway Brigg, 22nd floor. Ask for the gray file. Thursday, 10 through. I frowned. This wasn't a new note. The paper was yellowed. This note had been in the glove for years, maybe decades. Thursday, that was tomorrow. But the text messages today, the man on the phone, he was reacting to now. This note was from then. I looked closer at the paper on the back in a different ink blue ballpoint. Fresh and smudged was a single scroll. Come alone. No tails. The blue ink was fresh. The old man Elias had written on the ancient note recently. He had prepped these gloves for me. He knew exactly where I would look. He wasn't just hiding from my family. He was hiding from someone else. Someone who made him change meeting locations 3 times. Someone who made him live on the street to stay invisible. I realized then that the legal administrative hold on the storage unit and the search for the gloves wasn't just a bureaucratic hurdle. It was a hunt, and I was the bait he had just thrown into the water. I went home and barricaded the door. I turned off my phone. I didn't check Instagram. I didn't check my email. I sat in the dark watching the city lights, holding the gloves. The night passed in a blur of anxiety and adrenaline. I didn't sleep. I just strategized. The next morning, I dressed not as a realtor, but as a warrior. A sharp black suit, hair pulled back tight. No jewelry except a simple watch and the gloves. I took a cab to the law firm. I didn't drive my car. I didn't want to be tracked. I had the cab drop me 2 blocks away and walked the rest. Checking reflections in store windows. I saw no one. Just the morning commute. Holloway and Brigg was located in the Dominion Tower. The same tower where the penthouse I was supposed to sell was located. Felt like fate or a very cruel joke. I walked into the lobby. It was a cathedral of marble and glass. I checked in at security. Addison Gray to see Dana Kessler, I said. The guard checked his list. He looked at me, then at the gloves. He pressed a button. You're cleared. 22nd floor. I walked to the elevator banks. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would crack a rib. I stepped into the elevator. It was empty. The door slid shut, sealing me in a mirrored box. I watched the numbers climb. 5, 10, 15. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. There were dark circles under my eyes, but my jaw was set. I looked like my mother in that old photo, but harder, less reckless, more desperate. Ping. The elevator stopped at the 20th floor. The doors opened. I expected a lawyer or a secretary. No one got on. But as the doors started to close, I saw a reflection in the mirror at the back of the elevator. I spun around. There was no one there. The elevator was empty. I turned back to the mirror. My reflection stared back at me. But behind my reflection, standing in the corner of the elevator in the glass, was a man. He was wearing a gray suit, impeccable and sharp. He had silver hair and a silver beard. He was standing perfectly still, his hands folded in front of him. I gasped and spun around again. Empty space. I looked back at the mirror. He was there. It was a trick of the glass, a hologram, a ghost. No. I looked closer at the mirror. It wasn't a reflection of the inside of the elevator. The rear wall of the elevator wasn't a mirror at all. It was a one-way glass panel looking into the adjacent service elevator shaft. The man was in the other elevator, moving up alongside me at the exact same speed. He was looking right at me through the glass. It was him, the homeless man. But he wasn't homeless anymore. The beard was trimmed. The suit was worth more than my car. The eyes were the same, steely, intelligent, and terrifyingly calm. He raised a hand wearing a matching brown leather glove, and pressed it against the glass. I instinctively raised my own hand, pressing my gloved palm against his through the layers of glass and steel. We rose together, locked in a silent ascent. Two conspirators separated by a wall of physics, but connected by a secret. Ping. The 22nd floor. My doors opened. His did not. I stepped out into the plush lobby of the law firm. My legs trembling, I looked back. The elevator doors closed, taking him higher or lower. Ms. Gray, a receptionist, stood there smiling professionally. Ms. Kessler is expecting you. Please come this way. I followed her, my mind reeling. He was here. He was inside the building and he wanted me to handle this part alone. I walked down the hallway, the sound of my heels muffled by the thick carpet. I wasn't just fighting for my money anymore. I was fighting for answers, and I knew with a certainty that chilled my blood that whatever was in that file was going to destroy the version of the world I had lived in for 29 years. I clutched the gloves. Ready? I whispered, and I walked through the double doors. Thursday evening arrived with the weight of a judgment day. The sky over Pittsburgh was a bruise of deep violet and charcoal, clearing just enough to reveal the glittering skyline that the sterling penthouse was designed to showcase. I stood in the center of the living room, a space so vast it had its own weather system. The floors were Italian marble, cold and unforgiving. The windows were floor-to-ceiling sheets of glass that turned the city lights into a personal mural for whoever had $4 million to spare. I checked my reflection in the glass. The woman looking back at me was not the same person who had shivered outside a bakery 48 hours ago. I was wearing a structured black dress that cost more than my car alone from a stylist friend I had bartered with, and my hair was pulled back into a severe elegant chignon, but the most important accessory was not visible. The leather gloves were tucked safely into the inner pocket of my blazer, resting against my ribs. I could feel their weight. They were my secret weapon. A reminder that I was playing a game much larger than selling a condo. Check 1, 2. The audio technician murmured, adjusting the wireless microphone system I had requested. Make sure the volume is balanced, I said, my voice calm. I want to be heard in every corner of the room, including the terrace. Marcus, the security guard from Ironclad, approached me. He looked like a mountain in a suit. We are all set at the lobby, Ms. Gray, he said, his earpiece blinking blue. Guest list is tight. No one gets up without an invite and ID. I have the photos of the prohibited individuals distributed to my team. Good. I said they will try to get in. Marcus, my mother is tenacious and my sister thinks rules are suggestions. Do not let them ruin this. They won't get past the elevator. He assured me, By 7 o'clock, the room was humming with the expensive murmur of wealth. The guests were the elite of the city tech mogul, old money heirs, and investors looking to park capital. Champagne flutes clinked like wind chimes. I moved through the crowd, shaking hands, pointing out the heated floors and the smart home integration. I was performing perfectly. I was charming, knowledgeable, and utterly professional. But my eyes never left the elevator doors. Every time they chimed, my stomach tightened. At 7:30, the elevator opened and a surge of new guests arrived. It was a group from a hedge fund, loud and laughing. Behind them, slipping in through the closing doors like smoke, were two women. They were dressed in oversized coats and wide-brimmed hats that looked ridiculous indoors. Paired with dark sunglasses, they looked like bad caricatures of movie stars trying to be incognito. My heart hammered. It was them. How had they gotten past Marcus? I saw them scan the room. The younger one, Blair, pulled out her phone. She didn't hold it like a guest taking a photo of the view. She held it high, vertical, in the aggressive posture of a live stream. They began to push through the crowd toward the center of the room, right where a potential buyer, a stoic woman named Mrs. Halloway, ironically a senior partner at a rival law firm, not the one I had visited, was examining the fireplace. Addison. The scream shattered the cocktail jazz ambiances. It was my mother. Marian threw off her hat with a dramatic flourish, revealing a face contorted in practiced agony. Addison, how could you? She wailed, rushing forward. The room went dead silent. 50 heads turned. Blair was right behind her. Phone thrust out, narrating to her digital audience. There she is, guys. The woman who stole our family savings to throw this party. Look at her. Look at that dress bought with stolen money. Security, I said into my lapel mic. But the crowd was too dense for Marcus to reach us instantly. Marian grabbed my arm. Her grip was like a vice, sharp and painful. You heartless girl. Your father is sick with worry. You abandon us. You steal from us and then lock us out. She was improvising. Tom wasn't sick. He was probably at the bar down the street waiting for the signal. Let go of me, I said, my voice low. Help me? Marian shrieked, turning to the stunned guests. Please, someone help me. My daughter is abusing us. She is a thief. Then she did the thing she had perfected since I was 5 years old. She gasped, clutched her chest, and crumpled to the floor in a heap of cashmere and fake tears. Mom! Mom! Blair screamed, dropping to her knees, the phone still recording. Oh my God! She's having a heart attack. You killed her, Addison. You killed her with your greed. The guests gasped. People started to back away, murmuring. Phones were coming out. This was a disaster. This was the end of my career. This was exactly what they wanted. I looked down at them. Marianne was breathing perfectly fine. I could see her eyelids fluttering. Blair was checking her viewer count while pretending to check a pulse. In that moment, the fear vanished. It was replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I didn't kneel. I didn't cry. I didn't beg them to stop. I walked to the small podium where the microphone stand was waiting. I picked up the mic. The feedback whine cut through the room, making everyone wheeze. It silenced Blair's screaming instantly. Ladies and gentlemen, my voice boomed through the overhead speakers, calm, authoritative, and terrifyingly steady. I apologize for the interruption. It appears we have uninvited performers this evening. I looked directly at Blair, who froze, her phone still raised. The two women currently on the floor are Moran Gray and Blair Ree. I continued, my voice echoing off the marble. They are not guests. They are here in violation of building security protocols. And contrary to the performance you are witnessing, my mother is not having a medical emergency. She is having a tantrum because I refused to give her $2,500 for a vacation to Cabo. A ripple of shock went through the room, not at the cruelty, but at the raw, unvarnished truth of it. Marianne's eyes snapped open. She forgot she was supposed to be unconscious. She sat up, glaring at me. "You liar," she hissed. "I have the text messages on file," I said into the mic, addressing the room like a courtroom. "I also have the police report filed this morning regarding harassment and extortion. This is not a family tragedy. This is a shakedown." I pointed to the back of the room where Marcus and 2 other guards were finally breaking through the crowd. "Security, please remove these trespassers. They are disturbing the guests. You can't do this," Blair shrieked, jumping up. She turned the phone to the crowd. "She is silencing us. She is attacking a mother. This is abuse. Help us." She lunged toward Mrs. Halloway, the VIP buyer, grabbing the woman's sleeve. "You look like a mother. Don't let her do this." Mrs. Halloway didn't flinch. She was a woman who had negotiated mergers worth billions. She looked at Blair's hand on her arm, then looked at Blair's phone, then looked at me. "Get your hand off my Armani suit," Mrs. Halloway said, her voice like cutting glass. She turned to me. "M. Gray, is it?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. "You handle a crisis well, Mrs. Halloway said loud enough for the room to hear. "I like an agent who doesn't crumble when the garbage spills over. Security, get this trash out of here." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in a murmur of agreement. The spell of the victimhood was broken. The wealthy elite of Pittsburgh knew a grifter when they saw one, and Mrs. Halloway had just cast the deciding vote. Marcus reached them. He didn't handle them roughly, but he handled them firmly. He grabbed Blair's arm and Marianne's shoulder. "Let's go, ladies," Marcus growled. "I'm suing you," Blair screamed, struggling. "I'm live streaming this. You are hurting me. You are trespassing," Marcus said, his voice bored. "And you used fake IDs to enter a secure building. That is a felony." "Ma'am, the police are already in the elevator lobby." At the mention of police, Marianne's defiance evaporated. She realized this wasn't the kitchen table where she could bully me into submission. This was the real world, and she was losing. She looked at me, her eyes wet with real tears now. Tears of defeat. "Addie, please don't let them arrest us. We just wanted to talk." I stood on the podium, looking down at her. I saw the woman who had drained my trust fund. The woman who had made me feel small for 29 years. "You didn't want to talk," I said, my voice amplified, filling the penthouse. "You wanted to destroy me because I stopped being your ATM." I lowered the mic slightly, but the room was so quiet. Everyone heard me anyway. "You only remember I am your daughter when you need someone to pay the bill. The bank is closed. Mother, get out." Marcus dragged them toward the service elevator. The doors opened, revealing 2 uniformed police officers. The sight of Blair trying to hide her phone and Marianne weeping as they were cuffed was the most tragic and satisfying thing I had ever seen. The doors slid shut. The silence that followed was heavy. I took a deep breath. My hands were trembling slightly, but I willed them to stop. I smoothed my dress. "Now," I said, raising the microphone one last time. A small professional smile touching my lips. "If we could all turn our attention back to the view. The sun has just set, and I believe the city lights are particularly beautiful tonight." For a second, no one moved. Then Mrs. Halloway started to clap. It was a slow, deliberate applause. Then another person joined in. Then another. Soon the entire room was applauding. They weren't clapping for the house. They were clapping for the show. They were clapping for the steel backbone I had just displayed. "Brilliant," a man whispered as he passed me. "Absolutely ice cold. I love it. Do you have a card?" Another woman asked, I have a property in Shadyside. I need to move and I need someone who can handle difficult tenants. The open house didn't collapse. It exploded. The energy in the room shifted from polite interest to electric excitement. I was no longer just a junior agent. I was the woman who had faced down a hurricane and didn't blink. I spent the next hour collecting business cards, shaking hands, and scheduling 3 private showings for the next day. Mrs. Halloway told me she was drafting an offer. By 9 o'clock, the crowd began to thin. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, finally allowing myself a moment to exhale. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me exhausted but exhilarated. I looked out at the reflection of the room in the dark glass. That was when I saw him. He wasn't inside the penthouse. He was standing on the terrace on the other side of the glass, braving the bitter wind. He was wearing a tuxedo coat over his shoulders, looking like a phantom from the 1920s. The silver beard was trimmed, his posture regal. Elias. He wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at me. He wasn't smiling. He was nodding. A slow, almost imperceptible nod of approval. He had watched the whole thing. He had seen me refuse to break. He had seen me use the truth as a weapon instead of a shield. I placed my hand against the glass. He raised his hand, the gloved hand, and touched the glass on his side. It was a grating and I had just passed the midterm. I realized then that the meeting at the law firm earlier that day hadn't been the test. The lawyer had only verified my identity. This public execution of my past self was the real test. He wanted to know if I was strong enough to be a Whitlock. I looked at his reflection, then at mine. The resemblance was undeniable now. The same jawline, the same eyes that refused to look away. I turned to go out to the terrace to finally ask him the question that had been burning in my throat for 2 days. But when I pushed the sliding door open and stepped into the cold wind, the terrace was empty. The only sign he had been there was a single white business card resting on the railing, weighed down by a heavy brass key. I picked it up. The card had no name, just a handwritten address and a time. The Whitlock Estate, midnight, and the key was old, iron, and heavy. It wasn't for a door. It looked like it was for a gate. I looked out at the city. My mother was in a police car. My sister was ruined on social media, and I was holding the key to a kingdom I didn't even know existed. I closed my fist around the key. The cold metal bit into my palm, grounding me. Okay, grandfather, I whispered to the wind. I'm coming home. The morning after the open house did not feel like a victory lap. It felt like the cold clinical aftermath of a surgery. The tumor had been removed. My family was physically gone from the premises, but the wound was still fresh, and I had to stitch it up before infection set in. I sat in a small windowless conference room at the county courthouse. A stack of papers 3 in thick sitting on the table between me and the clerk. You have quite a bit of documentation here, Ms. Gray, the clerk said, adjusting her glasses. She looked tired, used to seeing domestic disputes that were messy and incoherent. But my file was different. It was categorized, tabbed, and chronological. I wanted to be thorough. I said, my voice flat. I had spent the entire night printing everything. The text messages from my mother demanding money, the threatening voicemails from Tom, the screenshots of Blair's live stream where she incited her followers to harass me, the police report from the open house detailing the trespassing and the fake medical emergency. I wasn't filing a complaint. I was filing for a restraining order. This meets the threshold for harassment and stalking, the clerk noted, stamping the top page with a heavy, satisfying thud. The judge will likely grant the temporary order immediately. The hearing for the permanent one will be in 2 weeks. Thank you, I said. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a strange lightness. For 29 years, I had been conditioned to protect the family secrets, to hide the bruises, both emotional and financial. Filing that paperwork felt like breaking a bone that had healed wrong so it could finally be set right. But the legal war was just beginning. I took a cab straight to the offices of Halloway and Brigg. This time, I didn't go to the mysterious 22nd floor. I went to the 18th to the office of Dana Kessler, the attorney who had sent the initial email. Dana was a woman who looked like she could cut glass with her jawline. She wore a suit that cost more than my first car, and her desk was terrifyingly empty. Save for a single file, the Gray Trust. You handled the situation at the penthouse well, Dana said, not looking up from the documents. Mrs. Halloway, no relation. Just a coincidence of the elite called me. She said you have a spine. I said, sitting down. I placed the leather gloves on the edge of her desk. They were my talisman now. I didn't go anywhere without them. Good, Dana said, finally meeting my eyes. Because what we are about to do requires a spine. It requires you to be absolutely dispassionate. She spun a document around to face me. It was a forensic accounting breakdown of the trust fund my mother had managed for the last decade. I took the liberty of running a deeper analysis after you flagged the discrepancies. Dana said, Addison, look at these withdrawal slips. Look at the signatures. I leaned in. The signatures at the bottom of the authorization forms read Addison Gray. They were dated from years when I was in college, years when I was working 2 jobs, years when I was ostensibly consenting to these funds being released for family maintenance. That looks like my signature, I whispered. It was a good forgery. It looks like it, Dana corrected. But look at the pressure points. Look at the loop on the Y. And look at the dates. This withdrawal for $12,000 was signed on October 14, 2015. I frowned. I was in the hospital that week. I had appendicitis. Couldn't even hold a pen. Exactly, Dana said, leaning back. These aren't just mismanagement, Addison. This is fraud. Utter systemic fraud. Your stepfather and mother didn't just spend your money. They impersonated you to get it. They have been committing felonies for 15 years. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. It wasn't the hot, tearful anger of a daughter betrayed. It was the cold, calculating anger of a victim who finally seized the weapon. What do we do? I asked. We stop playing defense, Dana said. We go on the offensive, but not with screaming matches on Instagram. We don't win with emotion. We win with paper. She slid a new document across the desk. It was a formal demand for a third-party independent audit coupled with a freeze on all assets currently held by Marion Gray and Tom Rhee pending an investigation into fiduciary theft. If you sign this, Dana said, her voice grave, you are essentially declaring war. You are triggering a federal investigation into your parents' finances. They could lose their house. They could go to prison. I looked at the paper. I thought about the text asking for $2,500 for a vacation while I ate instant noodles. I thought about Blair's fake tears. I thought about the consulting fees Tom paid himself while telling me I was a burden. They built their house with bricks they stole from my foundation, I said quietly. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. Burn it down, I said. I signed my name, the real signature. Excellent, Dana said, snapping the folder shut. Now on to the second matter, the matter of the gloves. She stood up. Come with me. We are going upstairs. Upstairs? I asked. To the 22nd floor. Yes, the senior partners are waiting. As we walked to the elevators, I checked my phone. Blair had posted 3 more videos in the last 2 hours. But the tide was turning in her desperation to paint me as a villain. She had gotten sloppy. In one video, she claimed I stole $50,000. In the next, she said it was $100,000. Commenters were noticing. Wait, yesterday you said she was broke. Now she's a mastermind thief. One user wrote, "If she stole the money, why are you the one posting from a Range Rover while she drives a 2010 Civic?" Another asked, "Show the receipts, Blair. Stop crying and show the bank statements." She was flailing. She was blocking people, deleting comments, and posting manic defenses that only made her look more guilty. I didn't have to do anything. I just had to let her talk. As Dana had said, give them enough rope and they will hang themselves. We stepped into the elevator. Dana used a key card to access the 22nd floor. The atmosphere up there was different. It was quieter. The carpet was thicker. The air smelled of old money, leather, mahogany, and silence. We walked down a long hallway lined with oil paintings of severe-looking men in suits. "Halloway and Brigg has represented the Whitlock interest for 80 years, Dana explained as we walked. "We don't just handle their taxes, we handle their legacy." She stopped in front of a heavy set of double doors, but didn't open them yet. Instead, she gestured to a large portrait hanging in the foyer of the executive suite. "Take a look," she said. I stepped closer to the painting. It was an oil-on canvas clearly dated from the late 1970s. It depicted a man in his 30s standing in front of a construction site. The steel skeleton of what I recognized as the Dominion Tower, the very building we were standing in. He was handsome with sharp, intelligent eyes and a jawline that could cut steel. But my eyes were drawn to his hands. He was holding a set of blueprints and on his hands were brown leather gloves. I looked closer. The artist had been meticulous. On the left glove near the thumb was a faint painted scratch. I looked down at the gloves I was holding. The scratch was real. The gloves in the painting were the gloves in my hand. "That is Elias Whitlock," Dana said softly. "The titan of Pittsburgh real estate. He built half this city. He was a man who valued loyalty above all else. And he was a man who was famously betrayed by his own board of directors in 1995. "Betrayed?" I asked. "They forced him out." Dana said it was a hostile takeover orchestrated by his own family members' cousins, nephews. They declared him mentally unfit to seize control of the trust. He disappeared, walked away from the empire he built rather than fight a dirty war with people he loved. My breath caught. He became homeless. He became invisible, Dana corrected. He took the one thing that mattered to him, his integrity, and he waited. He waited for the non-compete clauses to expire. He waited for the usurpers to bankrupt themselves, which they eventually did, and he waited for an heir. She turned to me. "He didn't know about you for a long time, Addison. Your mother did a very good job of hiding you. She changed her name. She buried the birth certificate. She knew that if Elias found out he had a granddaughter, the game was up." "What game?" "The game where she gets a monthly stipend to stay away." Dana said, "That trust fund you saw, that wasn't a gift. That was a bribe. Your mother has been paid $5,000 a month for 30 years to keep you a secret. She just decided to keep the money for herself and tell you that you were poor." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just theft. It was a transaction. I was the product they were selling. My silence was the commodity. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why hide me?" "Because of the clause," Dana said. She put her hand on the brass handle of the double doors. "The Whitlock family charter has a specific return of assets clause. It states that the control of the primary holding company, the billions, not the thousands, can only be transferred to a direct blood descendant who presents the signifier of authority to the board." She pointed to the gloves in my hand. "The gloves are the signifier," Dana said. "They are not just warm leather, Addison. They are the crown. Whosoever holds the gloves holds the vote." My knees felt weak. "So when he gave me these, he was abdicating," Dana said. "Or more accurately, he was designating his successor." But there is a condition: the successor must be of sound character. He had to test you. He had to know if you would sell them or lose them, or if you were just another greedy gray. The test, I whispered, the open house, the money, the refusal to fight dirty. Exactly. Dana said he watched you. He watched you starve rather than steal. He watched you protect your dignity when your family tried to strip it away. You passed, Addison. So what happens now? I asked. Now, Dana said. We opened the door. She pushed the heavy mahogany doors open. The conference room was vast. A table long enough to seat 20 people dominated the center. At the far end facing the door was a single chair. Sitting in it was the man. He was no longer wearing the windbreaker. He was wearing a charcoal three-piece suit that fit him perfectly. His silver hair was brushed back. He looked powerful. He looked like the man in the portrait, just weathered by 40 years of winter. But when he looked up, the eyes were the same, the sharp gray eyes that had looked at me over a cup of coffee in a snowstorm. He stood up. He didn't smile. He didn't rush over to hug me. He stood with the quiet, terrifying gravity of a planet. "Hello, Addison," he said. His voice was the same growly baritone, but it echoed with authority in this room. "Elias," I said, stepping into the room. "You kept them safe," he said, looking at the gloves in my hand. "You told me to," I replied. "You said not to let them get ruined by people who aren't worth it." He nodded slowly. "And you didn't. You realized that you were the one worth protecting." He walked around the table, closing the distance between us. Close. I could see the lines on his face, lines etched by cold nights and hard decisions. "I am sorry I had to do it this way," he said softly. "I couldn't just tell you. If I had told you who you were, you might have been blinded by the gold. I needed to know who you were when you had nothing, because a Whitlock is not defined by their bank account. They are defined by what they do when the bank account is empty." He reached out a hand. "My lawyers tell me you have filed for a forensic audit of your mother's accounts," he said. "Yes," I said. "I am going to get back what they stole." "Good." Elias said, "But that is small thinking, Addison. That is thinking about thousands." He gestured to the window, to the sprawling city of Pittsburgh below us. "We need to talk about the skyline," he said. "Because as of this morning, half of those buildings belong to you." He paused, his eyes locking onto mine. "But first," he said, holding out his hand, palm up, "I believe you have something of mine, and I believe the contract requires you to return it voluntarily." I looked at the gloves. Then I looked at him. I realized this was the final step, the surrender of the symbol to gain the power. I stepped forward and placed the gloves in his hand. "They kept my hands warm," I said. "And now," Elias said, gripping the gloves tight, "we are going to use them to strangle the lies your family has been telling for 30 years. "Sit," Elias said. It was not a request. I sat in the high-backed leather chair, the silence of the room pressing against my ears. The man who called himself Elias Whitlock stood at the head of the table, his hand resting on the gloves I had just surrendered. He ran his thumb over the scarred leather, a gesture so intimate and familiar it made my chest ache. "You have questions," he said, not looking at me. "But first, I have one for you." He finally looked up. His eyes were dissecting me. I checked the market value of these gloves. They are bespoke, Italian leather, cashmere-lined, even used to a collector. They could fetch $500, maybe more if you spun a story about where you found them. He paused, letting the number hang in the air. "You were broke, Addison. You were desperate. You had unpaid bills and an empty refrigerator. A pawn shop was 3 blocks from the bakery where we met. So tell me, why didn't you sell them?" I blinked, surprised by the question. It seemed so irrelevant compared to the magnitude of the skyscrapers outside the window, buildings he apparently owned. "I didn't sell them," I said slowly, "because they were yours. I gave them to you, he countered. Possession is 9/10 of the law. You could have argued they were a gift. That is not why, I said. Then why? He pressed. Why keep a pair of old gloves when you needed cash for rent? I looked at him, really looked at him. I stripped away the expensive suit in the boardroom setting, and I saw the man in the windbreaker shivering in the snow. Because I thought you would be cold, I said softly. I kept thinking, if I sell these and the storm gets worse and he is out there with nothing, then I am just like them. I am just like the people who take what they want and leave others to freeze. Elias stared at me. His expression did not change, but the air in the room shifted. The tension, which had been as tight as a piano wire, suddenly slackened. He let out a long breath, his shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. You thought I would be cold, he repeated, almost to himself. He looked at Dana Kessler, the lawyer, standing silently by the door. She passed. Dana, I see that, sir, Dana said. Elias sat down heavily in the chair opposite me. He looked tired now, the adrenaline of the open house fading. My name is Elias Whitlock, he said formally. But for the last 20 years, I have been a ghost. I have been a rumor, a cautionary tale told in boardrooms about what happens when you let your family get too close to the checkbook. You were forced out, I said, remembering what Dana had told me in the hallway. I was hunted out, Elias corrected. It was a coup. My nephews, my cousins, they wanted the empire, but they didn't want the work. They orchestrated a scandal. They accused me of mental instability. They planted evidence. They turned my own board against me. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the mahogany table. I had a choice, Addison. I could fight them in the mud, drag the Whitlock name through a decade of lawsuits, and destroy the company I built, or I could disappear. I could let them think they won. So you became homeless. I became anonymous, he said. There is a difference. I have assets they couldn't touch. Offshore accounts, shell companies. I wasn't starving, though I chose to live simply to stay under the radar. But the primary assets, the controlling shares of the Whitlock Group, the land, the trust, were locked in a legal stalemate. Dana stepped forward, sliding a thick document across the table. The return of assets clause, she explained. When Elias stepped down, he triggered a dead man's switch in the company bylaws. The controlling interest was placed in a blind trust. It remains frozen until a direct blood heir presents the signifier of authority, the gloves, to the board of trustees. The gloves are the key. I realized literally they are the condition, Elias said. The bylaws state that the heir must be identified not by name, but by the possession of the item. It was my failsafe. I knew my nephews would try to forge documents or produce fake children to claim the trust, but they didn't know about the gloves. Only I knew. He looked at the gloves on the table. I spent years watching them ruin my company, he said, his voice bitter. I watched them sell off assets. I watched them cheapen the brand. I waited for them to destroy themselves. And while I waited, I looked for the one thing that could save it. An heir. He looked at me. I didn't know you existed, Addison. Not for a long time. I felt a cold shiver. My mother. Your mother? Elias said, the name tasting like poison in his mouth. Marianne. She was complicated. She left home young. She wanted nothing to do with the business. She wanted the money, but not the name. When she vanished, I thought she was just rebelling. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a legal document. It was a photocopy of an old record. When my investigators finally found traces of her years later, they found a birth certificate. Elias said, Yours? He slid the paper toward me. I looked down. It was a copy of my birth certificate from the state registry. Name, Addison Marie Gray. Date of birth, January 14, 1995. Mother Marianne Gray. Father. My eyes stopped. The line for father was blacked out. Not just empty. It had been redacted with a heavy black marker on the original copy before being filed. Or perhaps it was a copy of a copy where the name had been deliberately obscured. She hid it. Elias said she didn't just leave blank space. She actively suppressed the information. Why? I asked, my voice trembling. Because if your father's name was on that paper, Elias said, you would have been a Whitlock. And if you were a Whitlock, you would have been the heir to the trust she was trying to drain. I stared at the black line. All my life, I had felt like an outsider in my own home. I had felt like I was imposing on Tom and Marianne's perfect life. I thought they resented me because I was expensive, because I was another mouth to feed. But that wasn't it. They didn't resent me because I was a burden. They resented me because I was a threat. Every time I asked for money for a school trip, every time I needed a doctor, every time I existed in their space, I was a walking, breathing reminder that they were living on stolen time. They were terrified that one day I would wake up, realize who I was, and take it all away. The cruelty wasn't accidental. It was strategic. If they made me feel small, if they made me feel worthless and dependent, I would never look up. I would never ask questions. I would never find the gloves. She knew I whispered. She knew the whole time. She knew that if I found you, Elias said, the game was over, so she kept you hidden. She took the hush money I sent to keep her distance, and she used it to buy silence. She raised you to believe you were lucky to have a roof over your head when in reality the roof belonged to you. Tears pricked my eyes, not tears of sadness, but tears of pure, unadulterated rage. I thought about the ramen noodles. I thought about the broken heater in my car. I thought about begging Tom for help with my tuition and being told to work harder. I wasn't a poor relation. I was a displaced queen kept in rags by the court gestures. Why give me the gloves now? I asked, looking up at Elias. Why the test? Because blood isn't enough? Elias said sternly, I have seen what greed does to blood. I watched my own brother betray me for a percentage point. I needed to know if you were Moran's daughter or if you were his daughter. He touched the redacted line on the birth certificate. Who? I asked. Who is my father? Elias hesitated for the first time. The granite facade cracked. He looked vulnerable. My son, he said. Julian, I held my breath. Where is he? He died. Elias said, his voice breaking. 1995. A boating accident. Or so they said. It was the same year I was pushed out. The same year you were born, the same year Marian disappeared. He looked at me with an intensity that burned. I lost everything that year. Addison, my company, my son, my reputation. I thought the line ended with Julian. I thought I was the last one. He reached out and tapped the gloves. But then I saw you outside that bakery. You have his eyes. You have Julian's eyes. And when you gave me that coffee, when you showed kindness to a man who offered you nothing, I saw his heart. So you gave me the gloves, I said. I gave you the choice, Elias corrected. If you had sold them, you would have had $500 and I would have walked away. But you kept them. You brought them here. I am proposing a DNA test, Elias said, his voice becoming businesslike again, though his eyes remained soft. To be official, to satisfy the board, to satisfy the courts, I cannot promise you that this will be easy. The moment we file the paperwork, the media will descend, your mother will fight, the cousins will fight. I don't care about the fight, I said. I want to know the truth. Then we will get it, Elias said. Just then, the double doors of the conference room opened. A junior associate rushed in, looking pale. He handed a tablet to Dana Kessler. Dana scanned the screen, her lips thinning into a straight line. It has started, she said. What has Ma? I asked. Your mother, Dana said. She has been busy since she was released on bail this morning. She just filed a civil suit in the Court of Common Pleas. She tapped the screen and slid the tablet toward me. Plaintiff Marion Rhee. Defendant Addison Gray. Cause of action: theft, extortion, elder abuse. She is claiming that the gloves are a family heirloom that she entrusted to you for safekeeping. Dana summarized, her voice dripping with disgust. She claims you stole them from her jewelry box and are now using them to blackmail her for the trust fund money. She is painting a picture of you as a mentally unstable daughter preying on her grieving parents. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that startled me. She is claiming the gloves are hers. I asked. Yes, Dana said. She describes them in detail. She must have remembered Julian wearing them. She is walking into a trap. Elias said quietly. How? I asked. If she claims the gloves are hers, Elias said, a dangerous glint in his eye. Then she is admitting she knows their value. She is admitting she knows about the Whitlock connection, which means she is admitting to 30 years of fraud and concealing an heir. She is desperate. I said she is throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. She is trying to destroy your credibility before the DNA results come back. Dana said if she can paint you as a thief, the board might hesitate to accept you as the heir. Even with the blood match, they might argue character concerns. She wants a war, I said. Standing up, I placed my hands flat on the table. She can have one. I looked at the birth certificate with the blacked-out name. I looked at the forensic accounting of the stolen money. I looked at the lawsuit accusing me of the very things she had done to me. I turned to Elias. He was watching me. He wasn't interfering. He was letting me lead. Dana, I said, accept service of the lawsuit and then file the counterclaim. I want the DNA test expedited and I want a press conference. A press conference? Dana raised an eyebrow. Addison, usually we handle this quietly. No, I said. Blair used the media to lie about me. I am going to use the media to tell the truth. I want everyone to know. I want the whole city to know that the homeless man they stepped over was Elias Whitlock. And the daughter they called a thief is the rightful owner of the skyline. Elias smiled. It was a small, grim smile, but it was there. Spoken like a CEO. I walked over to him. The distance between us felt shorter now, but there was still a chasm of unanswered questions. I looked at his face, the lines, the silver beard, the eyes that mirrored my own. I thought about the coffee in the snow. I thought about the protection I felt when I wore the gloves. I needed to ask. I needed to hear him say it. My voice dropped to a whisper, stripped of all the legal bravado, stripped of the anger. The test will prove the biology, I said. But I need to know from you. I searched his face, looking for the father I never knew, the family I never had. Elias, I asked, my voice trembling, are you my grandfather? The room went silent. The hum of the air conditioning seemed to vanish. Elias looked at me. He looked at the birth certificate. He looked at the gloves. He opened his mouth to speak. He took a breath. His eyes shone with a moisture that hadn't been there a moment ago. But before he could answer, the heavy doors banged open again. Security guards rushed in. Mr. Whitlock, the head of security barked. We have a breach in the lobby. It's the press. Someone leaked the meeting. There are 50 cameras downstairs, and your nephews are with them. Elias's jaw tightened. The moment was broken. The answer was swallowed by the emergency. He looked at me, his face hardening back into the mask of the Titan. We have to move, he said. Now, he didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He grabbed the gloves from the table and shoved them into his pocket. Are you ready to fight, Addison? He asked. I looked at the door. I looked back at him. He was born ready, I lied. But as we ran toward the private elevator, I couldn't help but wonder if the silence was an answer in itself. or if he was still waiting for one last proof that I was truly his. The courtroom air was stale, smelling of floor wax and the specific acrid sweat of people who knew they were lying. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Dana Kessler. My hands were folded in my lap, squeezing the fingers together so hard the knuckles turned white. I was not wearing the gloves today. They sat on the evidence table, sealed in a clear plastic bag, looking like a dead animal on display. Across the aisle, my mother, Marianne, and my stepfather, Tom, were putting on the performance of a lifetime. Marianne was dressed in a soft pastel cardigan that made her look 10 years older and significantly frilier than she actually was. She dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue every time the judge looked her way. Tom sat with his arm around her, the protective patriarch, glaring at me with a mix of disappointment and menace. Blair was in the gallery behind them, not allowed at the defense table, but making her presence felt. She was live blogging the trial. I could see her thumbs flying across her phone screen, feeding her followers a narrative where I was the villain and she was the tragic heroine witnessing the destruction of her family. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. The Honorable Judge Vance swept in, his robes rustling. He was a no-nonsense man with a reputation for cutting through theatrics, which gave me a sliver of hope. Marianne's lawyer, a slick man named Mr. Sterling, who smelled of expensive cologne and cheap tactics, stood up first. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "This is a tragic case of elder abuse and extortion. My clients, Mr. and Mrs. Rhee, have spent their lives supporting the defendant, Addison Gray. They gave her a home. They gave her love. And in return, when they faced a momentary financial struggle, she not only refused to help, she stole a family heirloom and used it to blackmail them for access to a trust fund that was already depleted by her own educational expenses." He gestured to the screen set up in the corner. "We would like to submit Exhibit A into evidence, a video posted by the defendant's sister, Blair Rhee, documenting the emotional distress caused by Ms. Gray's actions." The screen flickered to life. It was the live stream from the open house, but it was edited. Cut out my speech. Cut out the applause. It only showed Marianne on the floor, weeping, and me standing over her with a microphone, looking cold and imperious. It showed Blair screaming that her mother was having a heart attack. "Look at the callousness," Sterling narrated. "Her mother is collapsing and MS. Gray is calling security." I felt a surge of nausea. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Furthermore, Sterling continued, "We contend that the item in question, the leather gloves, was stolen from Mrs. Reese's private jewelry box 3 days ago. Ms. Gray concocted a delusional story about a homeless man giving them to her to cover up her theft." I looked at Dana. She was writing calmly on her legal pad. She didn't look worried. "Your turn," Dana whispered. She stood up. She didn't use flowery language. She picked up a stack of documents that was heavy enough to make a thud when she dropped it on the podium. "Your Honor," Dana said, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "The defense tells a story. We prefer math. Math does not have a motive. Math does not lie." She projected a document onto the screen. It was the forensic accounting of the Gray Family Trust. "This is a ledger of withdrawals spanning 15 years. Dana said the defense claims the money was used for Ms. Gay's education. Yet here we have a withdrawal of $22,000 in 2014 labeled tuition. At that time, Ms. Gray was attending a state university on a partial scholarship, and her remaining tuition of $4,000 was paid via student loans, which she is still servicing today." Dana clicked a button. A new document appeared. A credit card statement belonging to Marianne Rhee. On the exact same week, the $22,000 was withdrawn for tuition. Mrs. Rhee paid a $21,000 deposit to a luxury interior design firm for a kitchen renovation. A murmur went through the courtroom. This pattern repeats 47 times, Dana said, flipping the pages. Withdrawals for medical expenses that align with cruise bookings. Withdrawals for legal fees that match the purchase price of a new truck for Mr. Rhee, and the most damning piece of evidence, the signatures. She zoomed in on a signature authorizing a release of funds. This purports to be Addison Gay's signature from October 14, 2015. On that date, Ms. Gray was hospitalized for an appendectomy. We have the hospital records. She was physically incapable of signing this document. Marian shifted in her seat. The pastel cardigan suddenly looked less like a costume and more like a straitjacket. This is not mismanagement, Dana concluded. This is systematic embezzlement and identity fraud. Mr. Sterling jumped up. Objection. This is a hearing about a restraining order and the theft of gloves, not a financial audit. It goes to character and motive, Your Honor, Dana said coolly. They are harassing my client to cover up their crimes. Overruled. Judge Vance said, leaning forward. Continue. Marianne, realizing her lawyer was failing, decided to take matters into her own hands. She stood up, ignoring Sterling's frantic hand gestures. He is lying, she shrieked, pointing at me. She is the liar. She stole those gloves. They are mine. My first husband gave them to me. They are a precious memory of a man she never knew, and she took them to hurt me. The room went silent. Dana smiled. It was a small predatory smile. So you admit, Dana said, turning to Marianne, that the gloves belong to your first husband, the biological father of Addison Gray. Yes, Marian cried, thinking she had scored a point. They are family property. She has no right to them. And you assert, Dana continued, that these gloves have significant value to you. They are priceless. Marian sobbed. Interesting. Dana said, because if they are priceless, Mrs. Rhee, why did you tell the police they were old trash when you filed the report? And more importantly, if they belong to Addison's father, why did you tell her for 29 years that her father was a drifter who left you with nothing? Marian froze. She realized too late that she had walked onto a landmine. I was protecting her, Marian stammered. No. A deep voice boomed from the back of the courtroom. You were protecting yourself. The heavy oak doors at the back of the room swung open. Every head turned. Elias Whitlock walked in. He was flanked by 3 men in dark suits who looked less like lawyers and more like Secret Service agents. But no one looked at them. They looked at Elias. He radiated power. He walked down the center aisle with a stride that commanded absolute silence. He was not the homeless man in the windbreaker. He was the Titan of Pittsburgh. Judge Vance's eyes went wide. He recognized the man. Everyone in the city over the age of 50 recognized the man. Mr. Whitlock, the judge asked, his voice losing its judicial authority for a split second. Your Honor, Elias said, stopping at the gate. I apologize for the disruption, but I believe I can shed some light on the ownership of the item in question. Marian turned pale. Her face went from pastel pink to a sickly ash gray. She looked like she was seeing a ghost, and in a way she was. This is highly irregular, Mr. Sterling spluttered, though he looked terrified. Who is this man? I am the owner of the gloves, Elias said, stepping through the gate. And I am the man this woman has been robbing for 30 years. He took the stand. He didn't need to be asked. The bailiff was so stunned he forgot to hold out the Bible until Elias gently tapped it. I swear, Elias said. State your name for the record, the judge said. Elias Whitlock the hand, he said. A gasp rippled through the gallery. The reporters in the back row started typing furiously. Blair dropped her phone. Mr. Whitlock, Dana asked. Do you recognize the defendant? Addison Gray. I do, Elias said, looking at me. His eyes were soft, a stark contrast to the steel in his voice. She is the woman who gave me her breakfast and her kindness when I was sitting in a snowstorm 3 days ago. And the plaintiff, Marion Rhee. Elias turned his gaze to my mother. Marion shrank back, physically recoiling from his stare. I recognize her, Elias said. She is the woman who took my son, Julian, away from me. She is the woman who cashed my checks every month for 3 decades to keep a secret. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. Your Honor, I submit into evidence the results of a DNA test conducted yesterday by the Gentech lab expedited at my request. The bailiff took the envelope and handed it to the judge. The results confirm, Elias said, his voice ringing through the hall, that Addison Gray is the daughter of Julian Whitlock, my son, and consequently, she is my sole surviving grandchild and heir. Marion let out a low moan and put her head in her hands. Heir, Tom whispered, looking at Marianne. You said the father was a nobody. You said the trust was small. She lied to you too, Tom. Elias said coldly. Though you were happy enough to spend the hush money, Elias turned back to the judge. The gloves on that table are not just leather. They are the signifier of authority for the Whitlock Family Trust. A clause in our bylaws states that control of the primary assets returns to the family only when a direct heir voluntarily presents these gloves to the board. He looked at me. Addison didn't steal them. I gave them to her. I lived on the street to find her. I wanted to see if my granddaughter had integrity. I wanted to know if she would sell a pair of expensive gloves for quick cash or if she would keep them because she worried about an old man freezing in the cold. I felt tears running down my face. I didn't wipe them away. She passed the test. Elias said she returned the gloves to me yesterday voluntarily. In doing so, she unlocked the entirety of the Whitlock estate, which is valued at approximately $4 billion. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. $4 billion. Tom looked like he was going to vomit. Blair looked like she had been struck by lightning. Marion just stared at the table, her life of lies unraveling into a pile of dust. However, Elias continued, his voice turning hard as stone. We also submit this. He pulled a thick file from his briefcase. This is the result of a private investigation into the handling of the minor trust assigned to Marion Rhee for Addison's care. It details forgery, tax evasion, and grand larceny. My lawyers have already delivered a copy to the district attorney. He looked at Marianne. You wanted the gloves, Marianne. You wanted to claim them as property fine. Then you also claimed the history attached to them. You claimed the 30 years of theft. Judge Vance looked at the file, then at Marianne. Mrs. Rhee, the judge said, his voice dark. I am dismissing your suit with prejudice, and I am ordering the bailiff to detain you and Mr. Rhee pending the arrival of the officers from the fraud division. I believe there is significant flight risk here. No, Marion screamed, standing up. You can't. I am the victim. She is ungrateful. I raised her. You robbed her. Elias roared, slamming his hand on the railing. The sound cracked like a gunshot. You treated a princess like a servant and charged her for the privilege. Tom tried to run. He actually tried to bolt for the side door. The bailiff tackled him before he got 3 steps. Marianne was sobbing as the handcuffs clicked onto her wrists. She looked at me, her eyes wild. Addie, tell them I'm your mother. You can't let them take me to jail. I stood up. I walked to the railing. I looked down at the woman who had made me feel small my entire life. You told me not to dig up the past. Mom, I said softly. You said I would be ungrateful for what I found. Addie, please. I am grateful. I said, I am grateful. I finally know why you hate me. You hate me because I am the one thing you could never be real. They dragged her out. She was screaming my name, but I didn't feel the pull. The cord was cut. I turned to look at the gallery. Blair was standing there. She wasn't recording anymore. She looked small. She looked terrified. She walked up to the railing, her hands shaking. "Addie," she whispered. "I didn't know. I swear. Mom told me you were stealing. I was trying to protect the family." She reached out, trying to grab my hand. "Think of the twins, Addie. They are your nephews. They are family. We can start over now that we know. Now that we know you are a Whitlock, we can be a real family." She was doing it again. Pivoting, calculating. She smelled the $4 billion and suddenly I wasn't the thief. I was the golden ticket. I pulled my hand back. "I love those boys, Blair," I said, "and I will make sure their college tuition is paid directly to the school. You will never touch a dime of it." "Addie, please don't be like this," she pleaded. "Don't take revenge like this. It's cruel." I looked at her. I looked at the empty spot where my mother had sat. I looked at Elias, who was waiting for me. "I don't take revenge with fire, Blair," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I don't burn things down like you do. I take revenge with the truth. And the truth is, you don't love me. You love what I can give you, and I am all out of handouts." I turned my back on her. I walked over to Elias. He stepped down from the stand. The courtroom was chaotic. Reporters shouting questions. The bailiff calling for order, but in the small circle between us. It was quiet. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the gloves. The evidence bag had been opened. He placed them on the table between us. "It is done," he said. "Is it?" I asked. "Are they really gone?" "They are gone," Elias said. "They can't hurt you anymore, Addison." He looked at me and for the first time he smiled. A real smile. It reached his eyes, my father's eyes. "You know," he said, "I have a lot of empty rooms in that big house of mine, and I have a lot of work to do to fix this company. I could use a partner who knows how to sell a vision." "I have a job," I said, smiling back. "But my boss gave me 48 hours to fix my reputation." "I think you just did," Elias said, gesturing to the press who were practically climbing over the seats to get a photo of us. He placed his hand over mine on top of the gloves. "Addison," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you spent your whole life thinking you were the extra piece, the burden. But you were never the extra piece. You were the keystone. The whole thing would have collapsed without you." "Thank you," I whispered. "Grandfather." "No," Elias said, squeezing my hand. "Thank you. From the moment you were kind to me when I was nobody, you proved you deserved everything they tried to steal." We walked out of the courtroom together, arm in arm, into a blinding flash of cameras. I wasn't cold. I wasn't afraid. I was Addison Whitlock. And for the first time in 29 years, I was exactly where I belonged. Thank you so much for listening to Addison's story. I'd love to know where you are tuning in from. So, please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on the ending. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please make sure to subscribe to the HOA Karen Vlog channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.